everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our discussion on leading remote engineering teams. My name is Michelle Bakels, and I'm Program Director for Developer Health at G2I. If you're not familiar with G2I, really quickly, we are a hiring community focused on engineering. We've been around a little over 8 years and are globally diverse with about 2,000 engineers. We don't really consider ourselves a platform or an agency or a dev shop, but instead a community of developers and people that are trying to connect really good people to really great talent with a promise of quality, agility, and transparency. So part of our dedication to community is hosting these community events focused on knowledge sharing and information sharing from industry experts around the world to learn and grow together. So today I'm really excited to welcome our panel of guests. First, we have Ben Parisot, Engineering Manager at Planet Argon, Daniel Lizik, Engineering Manager at TableCheck, John Fletcher, Software Team Enabler at Codecentric AG, and our very own Lee Johnson, CTO at G2I. So for the format of this session, I'm going to ask a question and name one person to start answering that first, but anyone is welcome to join in answering after that. If you're joining us in the audience, whether it's Twitter or LinkedIn or with Crowdcast, there's a chat or comment section that you can leave your comments or any questions that you have. If you're in Crowdcast, there's a little dialog box with a question mark that's specifically for Q&As. If you leave your questions in the comments on LinkedIn, we'll be able to see those and bring those over. Feel free to join in the chat at any moment that you want to share something. We want to make this as interactive and engaging as possible. So with that said, first, I'd love to hear from each panelist briefly what their experience is with leading remote engineering teams, starting with Daniel.
Hey everybody, my name is Daniel. I've been a tech lead and now engineering manager for about 4 years at TableCheck. So TableCheck is a company in Tokyo, Japan, and we build software systems for restaurants. So the teams I lead have been comprised of ICs from North America, Europe, Middle East, Australia. It's an incredibly diverse team. I'm really proud to be able to drive that culture here.
All right, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Ben Parisot. I'm the engineering manager at Planet Argon. We are a Ruby on Rails agency headquartered in Portland, but with team members around the world. We are mostly focused on rescuing companies with really old legacy Rails applications from having to do a big rewrite. So we save old code bases and bring them into modernity. I joined Planet Argon about 3.5 years ago, right at the beginning of the pandemic, and right after Planet Argon had gone fully remote and left its office space. So I was thrust into remote management right from the jump. At the time, we were primarily Portland-based because it was a Portland-based office before the pandemic. But since then, we've gone on to hire people from California, Hawaii, Colorado, New York, Pennsylvania, Canada, Brazil, Romania, lots of places around the US and around the world.
Thank you for that. John.
Yeah, hi, I'm Johnny from Germany today. I live and work there for Codecentric AG, which is a Dienstleister. It's we do work for. Sorry, that was a German word. Forget the English term. But we just do IT services and IT consulting. We're an IT consultant and not specific to any industry. My experience with remote teams, I started my professional career in Australia, where I was born. And after a few years, I moved to Spain and actually did nearshoring work for Germany. So I was on the nearshoring side of the equation. And later I moved to Germany and was sitting on the other side of that nearshoring equation. And then after that, moved to work with other clients in with various kinds of mixed teams. Partially, this is all pre-corona, mixed teams, partially in Germany, partially overseas. And during that time, a lot of that time, I volunteered for an international church and did eventually engineering work and eventually leading the tech for a church with working with volunteers in various countries as well. So that was another kind of aspect of it all. And I would say since Corona, I'm sort of doing the same work as everybody else in this kind of half hybrid setup that we're in. And I could say that my experience mainly focuses on leading by doing, organic leading, rather than, I shy away from titles and that kind of thing. And yeah, I love to, that's why I'm a software team enabler. I love to try and help others to have greater impact.
Thanks, John. And Lee, welcome.
Hey, my name's Lee. I'm the CTO here for G2I, and this is going to make me sound really old. So I was a tech lead for Deloitte, managing remote developers part-time in 2006, full-time in 2008. Actually in the same state. It just is how it worked out. I was going to relocate, then didn't, and then they offered me a remote job. So I was the only remote person managing a bunch of people, but we had people in multiple states. So just by nature happened that early. So the COVID thing was kind of normal for me. So yeah, then last 9 years been doing startup stuff, and most of the time it's remote. And then transitioning into here, G2I, where almost all of our people working are remote. We definitely adopted the staff augmentation where people are on your team and not middle management, because just as experience with remote work, it just works better that way. So it's better when people are directly connected and there's not a lot of middle process, which in big companies like Deloitte tends to have quite a bit of. So it's nice to get to just the one-on-one.
Awesome, thanks. So Japan, Oregon, Germany, and Mississippi. I'm in Florida, Thea's in Denmark, Thea's behind the scenes. So we're really spread out. I feel like we are embodying the remote energy right now. So the first thing that I want to talk about is, I think, probably something we'd all agree is most important when being remote, is having good communication. So I want to ask, what are your tips or tools or philosophies around communication and having effective communication among your engineers, especially when they can be in different regions and time zones? And so for this question, I'd like to start off with Ben.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, so like I mentioned, we have a number of engineers and just regular other non-engineer teammates across multiple different time zones. And I think that the areas that I've had to focus on mostly as a manager for distributed team is ensuring that there's a couple of different places. One was mostly like ensuring that there's space and time for people to ask for help. I noticed that when you're in an office working with people, even if they're not directly communicating that they need help, it's kind of obvious from their behavior, body language. They might seem frustrated, and as their manager or as a tech lead, or even just as a fellow engineer, you can go over there and be like, hey, are you struggling with something? Or maybe they're more likely to just tap their neighbor on the shoulder and ask for help. When you're working remotely, it's easier, I've noticed, for devs to get into the habit of just trying to solely figure out a problem by themselves, and maybe blowing past the point where they should have asked for someone for help. So we have a couple of ways of dealing with that problem. One is, having standing check-ins or one-on-ones is really important. We do those depending on the person on the team, either weekly or bi-weekly. Also, we have a dedicated engineering help Slack channel, so people can pop in and ask for help about either a project-specific question or just some general coding best practice question or about a specific tech or tool. I also like to standardize the Pomodoro technique across my team, and then working individually with developers to figure out how many cycles they require in order to solve a problem on average, and then kind of creating that limit for them and say, okay, if you reach 2 or 3, I want you to go ask someone for help. So that just allows people, or encourages people to ask for help when they might spend too much time otherwise. I also think that just really overemphasizing over communication is key. I think it's easy when you are working on a remote team to assume that the people that you're communicating with have the context that you have, which is almost always not the case. It's true for engineers, it's true for PMs, product managers especially. We are an agency, so we work with a variety of different clients, and we try to encourage our clients to be active in Jira with us, which means creating tickets. But at the beginning, that was a little difficult because a lot of project stakeholders that aren't engineers don't understand like sort of the depth and context that goes into a good issue or requirements list. So we've created issue templates for all of our Jira issue types in order to let whoever's creating that ticket, whether it's a PM or a client, know exactly all the information and the type of information that's going to really help our engineers succeed. We also have created templates for intercommunication as well. So we use templates for PRs, obviously, like I mentioned, Jira issues, READMEs, wiki pages, even certain types of email. I really think, and I tried to express to my team, like if you think you're giving too much information, you're probably almost to the point where you should stop. And having those templates really underlines the importance of like setting expectations around communication. So not only the type of information, but how much information and when that information should be delivered. I find that if you set those expectations appropriately, then communication on a distributed team or with remote workers isn't going to be as fraught as it could be.
I'll jump in there and say that I remember the pre-corona days where there were a lot of it was dealing with technical and tooling issues. Like we had to fight against barriers to make sure we can really get the tools and the things we need to have proper communication. I think now post-corona, it's become really a given that we've got the tools and it's become more of a culture thing. How do we establish a culture where what Ben just said can happen, where people can interact really freely, and a lot of teams come up with things like trying to find low barrier ways to hang out, like having a meeting which is continually open, or a room or something like that where people just know they can click on it and there'll often be someone in there. Or it's also about making sure people then go to that room. But it's really now for me a cultural thing. The book I just mentioned in the chat is a great book in itself. And one of the things he talks about, he talks about what he calls red work and blue work, where he talks about sort of planning work and doing the work. And he talks about making sure we set stop moments to get out of this tunnel of saying, I'm working, no, I'm going to get there, and say, wait a second, should I really still be going on this path, or should I maybe change path? And it's quite hard sometimes to get out of that tunnel. And I think that's what Ben was referring to with sometimes in a remote scenario, you can more easily get stuck in that situation. And then some of the things you talked about, whether it's Pomodoro or whatever, finding ways to increase that interaction, that I have more of a likelihood I'm going to say, hey, Lee, what do you think about this? Or Lee asked me, what are you doing, John? Can you tell me where you're going with that?
I think to John's point about tools, one of the interesting byproducts of, I think, moving to a remote team and having a lot more available tools for communication, one thing we've had to deal with is people knowing where the appropriate communication channel is for the different types of communication. So we have that in our engineering handbook. Something I've had to work on last year is really outlining, okay, if it's this type of communication, this is the appropriate place for it, because some things are best for a Jira issue comment, some things are best for a quick Slack message. Even within Slack, there's you could DM someone, or you can put it in a project room, or you could put it in a general engineering channel. And with all of the communication options now, it can be kind of overwhelming, especially for a new engineer, either like new to the field or new to the team, to know like, okay, well, I have this question. I know I have a lot of opportunity or places I could ask it. Where's the best place to do that?
Thank you for that. Daniel and Lee, do you guys have any other insights or philosophies around remote communication?
Yeah, just to touch base on what Ben was mentioning about, the information being kind of like scattered, and that you have to become, as like a technical leader, you have to be like an information broker across various different parts of the company. I found that I haven't really found a good way to use any tool for this. I feel like it's just part of the job at some point. Um, if you have any recommendations for tools, please let me know. But yeah, I don't really know.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, obviously, a clear place where the work is defined. You guys, Ben, you mentioned Jira, something like that, where everybody, that's communication, right? Everybody knows what to do and what's assigned. That's really important. The trickiest part is honoring the asynchronous nature, because we get stuck in this. Like, we actually moved off of Slack to something like Basecamp for that reason. It was forcing people to feel like they had to be on at midnight or whatever time it is for you, Daniel. And that's not what we wanted. We wanted people to work independently where they were. And even if you don't intend the Slack message to get their attention right now, it's just, there's just something about it. There's an anxiety around it to where you feel like, oh, I've got to answer that. So Basecamp was a little more asynchronous in nature, like summarizing things. So that's kind of the trickiest part, is honoring the asynchronous and making it work. Now, obviously, synchronized touch points are really good. And I think getting the team together seems to do wonders. Like, we have lots of one-on-ones, but when you can get a group of people together, I don't know, there's just, it builds a little camaraderie, things you don't get in an office. But yeah, I would say that was the challenging part, was the doing asynchronous well and respecting people's time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I want to add in, John, you touched on culture, and I do believe that culture is led from the top of the company. And so when Lee's talking about how we moved away from Slack and we moved to Basecamp, for a lot of new employees, I'll speak for myself at G2I, it feels like a trick. Like, oh, wait, you don't want me to respond to things quickly? Like, you don't expect me to be on at 8 p.m. and answer to this right away. But I will say, it got the message across to me most clearly when our CEO, Gabe Greenberg, told us, like, oh, I don't have Basecamp and I don't have Slack on my phone. And I was like, oh, and I think he doesn't have email on his phone either. And I was like, okay, well, if the CEO founder doesn't have email, Slack, or Basecamp on his phone, like, I don't need to stress about having to be always on as well. So following down the culture path that you mentioned, John, there are also remote work situations in which you have a mix of contractor and full-time employee workforce or team. How do you go about making everyone feel like included and part of the team, and regardless of like their employment status or the length of employment, or how their contracts are situated, to feel like they're all part of working on something together? We'll start with you, John, of course.
Yeah. First of all, I think that's a amazing example you brought there of the leadership. I personally have seen often a kind of I call it a two-class society that develops, especially when you're talking about a kind of a rich country and a poor country, if you want to call it like that. People sort of feel like there's the client is in the country where the developers are expensive, and then we're doing some nearshoring or whatever to countries where the developers are less expensive, and people come in with this kind of servant status or whatever you want to call it. And I think that is something you've got to break through if you want to have really effective teams. And I say, hey, we only want to have a one-class society here. We're working in one team together on one thing. And so to break through that, I think you need to use I personally apply techniques that I would use anyway to get, let's say, more quiet people or let's involve people to try and get them involved. One thing, well, I could talk about a few different things. I'll talk about one interesting aspect because it actually has quite ranging implications. Google figured out that when they did Project Aristotle, the one that's quite well known because they found out that emotional safety is quite important, psychological safety, sorry. They found out also in that study that they call it equivalence of conversational turn-taking is quite important. And the short version of that is how often everybody speaks. So if we're sitting here and, and I'm speaking for 80% of the time and Michelle's speaking for 10% of the time and everyone else for 10% of the time, two people don't say anything at all, then that's a pretty unhealthy meeting. And when you hear this, you actually, you know it from your instinct. There's something wrong with a meeting where like one or two people are talking the whole time and the other people are just kind of sitting there or half falling asleep or whatever. And so this technical term, equivalence of conversational turn-taking, basically means when everybody takes the researchers counted how often people talk in meetings and said in teams where everybody speaks around about the same amount, they have really effective teams. They work really well. And you have that feeling when you go out of a meeting where everybody was involved. So the question is, how can I create that situation? How can I involve people? And it starts, one of the, a lot of tricks that you can use. I ask quiet people open questions. For example, I just take the opportunity to say, hey, Daniel, what do you think about that? If I see that Daniel hasn't been saying much. And don't ask them closed questions where they can say yes or no, because I just say yes. But if you ask them open questions, you get them talking. Another thing is just to highlight, is to make people aware of this issue. And then it comes down to questions like, well, how many people are going to be in the meeting? If I have a meeting with 8 people in it, it's almost impossible that everybody is going to talk and just as much as each other. So it's really, I really try to make small meetings, 3 people, if possible, really, and say, hey, let's let those people, there's might be some people that we can ping them if we need them, but we'll try it without them, things like that. And then you've got a much more chance of having that dynamic. That's one example. So I don't want to, let's say, overrun you with ideas, but that's one thing. Getting perhaps another thing I just posted in LinkedIn about it yesterday night is trying to increase the exposure of people who are not as exposed, not as loud, whatever, by getting them to write communication. If there's a Slack message that gets posted to a group where you announce something or an email or something, people subconsciously take it's very important, the author of that message, who wrote that thing, and they think that person is the important person, is involved in that. And if you as a manager or the PO or the lead developer always does that, then the focus is continually on that person. If you say, hey, let's get some of these people who are kind of in a remote location, aren't known, let's get them to write those messages, and all of a sudden people start to take them seriously, say, oh, that person's involved, So I could maybe say a few other things, but it's about the attitude really that we go into it and say, hey, we want to do what we can to get these people onto an equivalent level and get them seen. And if you have that attitude and you want that, then you'll find ways to make that happen.
Can I jump in? I think Michelle, your question was specifically regarding contractors, correct?
It was both, yeah, but basically creating kind of like an inclusive atmosphere on a team, regardless of the way you're employed.
I guess in my experience, like in my capacity as a, like engineering manager, as far as like mentorship and day-to-day work goes, I don't really distinguish much between contractors and full-time employees. In my opinion, it's more of a HR issue where we're talking about like contractors. The name itself implies that it's different, and there's fundamental differences between full-time employees, right? So contract status and well, especially in the US too, but in Japan, there's a thing called like seishain, which means like full-time, like lifetime employee. There's a lot of labor protection laws that go into like specifically protecting the employee. And if you are a contractor employed with a Japanese company, you do not have the benefits of a lot of these laws. So as far as I can provide, an inclusive and like equal environment for contractors or full-time employees, I can do that. In terms of HR stuff, maybe not as much as I can do, but that's something that that's like the partnership between like your HRBP and the technical leaders.
Jumping back to John's point about meetings and encouraging, multiple people to discuss during the meeting, something that I implemented on our team, and it's just this year that I implemented it, so still gathering some feedback. So this might be not something that I will suggest in 6 months or a year, but we'll see. It seems to be going well so far. Is we have all hands engineering team meetings every month, during which we talk about either usually both a technical project or problem that one of our teams has been working on, and then probably also some sort of internal process improvement that we want to focus on for the month. So at the beginning of the year, I implemented a new agenda item where at the end of each part of the meeting, I will call on one person randomly to summarize the conversation. That really got a lot of groans when I first rolled it out. But what I've noticed since then is that, one, people don't have any problem doing it. And two, I think it's encouraged people to, if anything, ask more questions during the meeting. We have, like a lot of really Rails-centric developers, but then also some, DevOps, SRE devs, and front-end engineers. And in the past, it's been pretty obvious that depending on the type of technical conversation that's going on, one or more groups is sort of tuning out in a way. And by having that unknown, like, oh, I might be the one called on to summarize in 2 or 3 sentences what just was discussed, kind of forces people to, at least if they're not actively participating, like listen, maybe take a few notes, maybe ask questions in, on mic or in the chat.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add, I think my approach is like Daniel, it's no different, including one-on-ones. And for the inclusivity, communication, meeting style, I have seen that when contractors especially are more comfortable in the one-on-ones, they start to become more comfortable in the group settings. Because at first they just don't really know what's going on, don't know the lay of the land. But as they become more comfortable with you and you're in that meeting, then they start to become more comfortable in the group setting too. So it kind of helps. So yeah, for me, it's no different. Same one-on-one, same everything.
One of the things I want to ask about is also, with leading effective engineering teams, it depends a lot on having really great people that are working for you and on your teams. I would say predominantly pre-COVID, interviews would be in person. People were working in person. I mean, companies would even fly high potential candidates out to their headquarters to meet them in person and to spend some time with them, make sure that they're getting great people for their teams. So the question is, interviewing, hiring people for your teams remotely. How do you go about this? What are some of the challenges and what are some of the tools and the techniques that you use to overcome this so that you can still get really great people even if you don't get to meet them face to face? And Lee, your turn to start first.
Yeah, so I guess, we do lots of interviews and we have processes with, tests and technical things, but for when it comes to that part of it, hasn't really changed. To me, Zoom is the exact same as you would do in person. You just do it in Zoom. So we have the same conversation, same questions. You're going to be working with this person through Zoom anyway, so it's a great way to see if you can communicate and if there's rapport there through the camera. And so, yeah, it's strange. Actually, it's so common to us these days that when I do go out somewhere, it's actually weird. Like I haven't worked in person in a really long time, so the Zoom just becomes second nature.
We at Codecentric, we do generally in-person interviews because we hire actually in Germany, and mainly the clients that rather have Depends. But we do a lot of, for my office, we do in-person interviews. But when we do our interviews, we really try to create situations as close to possible as how we'd work. So we don't ask people to resort trees and things like that if we're not working with trees in our code. We rather create sort of pair programming sessions that with real business code, not like start a new Spring service that, I don't know, does a Fibonacci sequence, but real business code in it. And, that kind of thing, because we want to see what's it like working with the person. And I never thought about it before, but it really makes a lot of sense, what you say, Lee, that if we're going to work with those people remotely, then you could say it makes most sense to interview them remotely. Why would I interview a person in person if I'm then going to work with them remotely?
I love this, like influencing each other in real time.
John's furiously taking notes. So when our interview process, we start with like 15 to 30 minute sort of screening call with me. And because we're such a small team at Planet Argon, I really need to check for not only like compatibility, but like what is this person going to add to the team, and how are they going to communicate their thoughts and opinions and things in a way that, because they're going to interact with everybody a lot, and so they need to be able to mesh pretty well. One of the things that I found helps with that is asking a lot of opinion related questions instead of just knowledge questions, at least at first. So tell me what you think about this Ruby gem, or if you had a code base that you were given 2 hours to explore, like how would you go about doing it? And that not only shows like, oh, this person is knowledgeable of what they're talking about, but it also demonstrates the way that they will sort of defend their opinion or say something. I like to look for people that have, confidence, but also humility. So if someone comes in, oh, well, that gem's terrible, blah, 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 like that's probably not going to be a good fit on our team. But someone that is excited about sharing their information, but also demonstrates the ability to listen to someone else's opinion, is probably going to be a very good fit.
Yeah, so on the topic of like sourcing candidates, in the context of Japan, searching for engineers that speak English, it can be pretty challenging sometimes. One thing I've found that has been really, really helpful is to have like a strong like engineering brand presence. So like social media presence, or like blog posts, LinkedIn presence. And if you have enough material out there that, like accurately conveys what your engineering culture is, uh, ideally, you're going to get the candidates that are best fit for you, like coming to you naturally, rather than you having to like search and have to talk to a billion different recruiters. This has actually worked pretty well for TableCheck in the past year or so.
I think that's a really great point, that I hadn't thought of either, because of course, a lot of marketing and positioning is towards customers and clients, but it will speak to the culture of the company as well. Like a tech company that comes to mind right away is Replit. And I think about how they, like what they promote of their company, what they share of their company, what they build. And I know that like the developer that's going to be attracted to Replit is going to be one that wants to be like highly experimental, and somebody that's like really like loves a good opportunity or a risk, wants to take a big risk. And so people who want to do like less risky work, they might self-select out of a company like Replit, but people who are really excited about a challenge might be like even more excited to be a part of that company. So that's a really cool point. There's a lot of engagement in the chat, which I'm really excited about. This is, by the way, our highest registered event that we've ever done, which is really exciting. I wanted to bring up a point that Peter made in the chat that got a couple like 100 emoji reactions. Unless I'm mistaken, contractors are treated in a special worse way. How about treating contractors almost like full-time employees? Sometimes they're contractors because there's no other way to join a company. correct me if I'm wrong. Personally, I don't treat contractors as a different kind of worker because we have the same goal, deliver great products. Yes, I think that's a great point. And so thank you for bringing that up. I also want to ask you guys, there's some tools that you guys have mentioned that you like to use. There's some things like that, Ben, you guys use Jira. I know, Lee, we don't use Jira, at least as far as I've been aware. We use Basecamp, maybe others don't use Basecamp. What are your what's your number one or top tools that you love for managing engineering teams remotely? And we'll start with Daniel.
Tools, let's see. So TableCheck has been using Jira and Confluence for a long time now. Confluence is kind of like it's very, very flexible, right? So you're able to do like performance reviews and evaluations in it if you create your own templates and that sort of thing. I haven't found like, a one-stop shop, solve all my problems, silver bullet type of like distributed team management tool. But yeah, so far things have been going okay at TableCheck with Slack, Confluence. Yeah, those are the two main ones, I guess.
We instituted, I never know how to say it because it's not anywhere on the site, tuple. It's a pair programming tool. There's a number of different pair programming tools out there. This one we found works really well. It's a pretty seamless shared screen control. So it has a video chat, voice chat, and also shared screen. So you can, while you're pairing, you can both be working on the same local file, and the speed and response time is the fastest that we've seen. So that's really been very helpful for us. Also, maybe a sort of surprising one that I found, we use DX, which is a developer experience monitoring tool. And this isn't very sort of real-time communication, but we've been using it for I think over 2 years now, and it sends out quarterly surveys to get metrics, sentiments across a bunch of different developer experience or satisfaction areas. And paying attention to those trends and seeing what people report on, the comments that they make, has really helped us sort of guide the direction of the engineering team, created fodder for engineering team meetings to talk about, and just, I think, allowed team members to feel, oh yeah, this is another place where we can contribute to the team culture and feel like we're being heard. Of course, if you don't do anything with that data, it's probably not going to be very helpful, but we really try to focus on those results and getting them up. And it seems like people really enjoy using that tool as well.
John, if you don't have anything, I'll jump in. Unfortunately for me, it depends, right? At Deloitte, we're consultants where the statement of work was kind of handed to us and timeline was kind of handed to us. So there we used Jira a lot. I mean, I was like a Jira nerd. I had my own workflows, issue types, you could do everything, literally everything in Jira. There was an issue type for that. But here and in the startup world, and when you get smaller teams and more senior engineers, we actually use ShapeUp, which is kind of like you give a big epic to somebody and a time frame, and they figure it out. So it completely depends. It depends on your team. Depends on the work type that you're doing. I think being willing to try different things to see what works the best for your situation, I think, is what I would recommend, because we tried many different things. GitHub issues, which we still use a little bit, but Jira, the smaller version, the little Jira Kanban version that's free, we tried all the different things, and we settled on ShapeUp. And for us, we got the most productivity out of it, and the people were happier because they got this big thing they got to do and got a lot of freedom in doing it. And it just worked for us. It wouldn't have worked at Deloitte when you've got a team of 12 doing this corporate thing and it has to be done a certain way with all these test coverages and rules. So you got to find the best, I guess, efficiency and thing that accomplishes your goals.
Actually, let me jump in. A lot of the teams at TableCheck now, the PMs have really jumped on board with using Jam for a lot of stuff, from brainstorming to sprint planning to everything, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, I was going to suggest one thing we've tried to do in the past year is find tools that are sort of easily integrated or a part of the developer's existing workflow. So, we moved our engineering wiki or handbook out of Confluence into GitHub because people were not updating it. They just don't, Confluence is great for a lot of things, but to get a developer to get into Confluence, update a page, share that page, like it's just very, it was challenging. So moved it into GitHub, and people were submitting PRs for updates to pages like day one. Same with Step Size is a tech debt tagging tool, and that's a VS Code plugin. And when we were before, like trying to get people to copy and paste tech debt or like code snippets into Jira, not all the time, but or file locations, file paths into Jira, and then just manually writing those tech debt issues. It just was too much to do, but now just right in their IDE, they can click a button and it'll automatically push it into the backlog. So anything that stays within their workflow, stays within the tools that they know, is probably going to be pretty well adopted.
Yeah, I'll just call out, Thea mentioned Loom. We use Loom a lot, and it's a nice way to see somebody's face and hear their voice in an asynchronous environment. So it's not necessarily just engineering. Actually, the engineers are really hard to get to use Loom, but myself included. But for everybody else, the entire team, it is a nice way to get a personalized update or a personalized bit of information.
Love Loom. John, are there any tools that you guys really love to use?
No, I don't have anything special to add other than I just recommended a very simple, if you're saying, oh, that's all quite overwhelming, you want a simple command line tool you can just try out in your mob or pair programming sessions and grab that tool. Quite a few of my colleagues quite enjoy using it. It's just a command line script.
Ben, I really like also your point about integrations. Yeah, there's kind of like endless possibilities, especially in the dev tools space, tools for developers, right? There's a lot of competition. But yeah, I mean, if you use Jira, then it will probably be good to use Bitbucket. If you stick within the Atlassian suite of tools, there's a lot of automated integrations and visibility across all of those different verticals that you can take advantage of without having to worry about maintenance and configuration. So that's a good point. I was also, when you were talking about this, I was also thinking about affordability, choosing tools around affordability. I remember there was this big like drama at an old job that I had because we were looking for a new chat tool. And everyone wanted Slack, of course. Everyone wanted Slack. But the company already had licenses for Microsoft, for all of the Microsoft tools. So when you have that license, Teams is free. And so it was like, when I tell you it was like a hard fought battle, where ultimately the Slack crew lost because it was just a hard cost to justify. So yeah, sometimes it's like a little bit about the P&L at the end of the day and the expenses. I wanted to, we only have 15 minutes left. That went really fast. Okay, I do have another question in my mind, but we'll start with the audience Q&As first so that we make sure that we get those answered. So for the first question that we have in the chat, John mentioned the difficulty of having everyone speak in large meetings. It seems like remote teams like to invite everyone to the meetings because there's this fear that if someone isn't present, they might miss some valuable context. Do you have any good methods for disseminating information across remote teams?
Maybe before we answer the actual, I suppose what they said, the actual question, maybe I could answer a meta question there. I think that that fear is not justified. I think that actually it's a great idea to set up like little working groups and say, hey, who wants to work on that issue? And if you've got a team with, I don't know, 8 developers, and they say, okay, these 3 people are interested, they take that away, they do their thing, and they come back to the team at some point and say, this is what we worked out. That's what we think the solution is. And normally that will then get accepted by the team. And that's a dynamic which I've found works really well. And if you want to reduce the amount of people in meetings, don't invite everybody, because people tend to mindlessly click on invitations and accept them and go to them. You have to rather ask who wants to come to this meeting, and if someone says yes, then you can invite those people, and then you whittle down the amount of people that come. So I think for just that cultural side, we don't need to stress about that. We have to trust each other to be able to get the job done and then inform us. But yeah, that's that side. Perhaps others have something to say to the strategies or tools.
One part on that, I think, is interesting is who the invite is coming from. I think really influences. Like if your boss is sending you an invite to a meeting, you're probably gonna accept it, even if it's an optional like cultural club type of meeting. We moved that responsibility to like our office manager, HR type of department, and then that started to become more like much more voluntary, because it was someone's colleague inviting them to a meeting, not someone's boss or direct manager. I think that there's a lot of great summary tools now, especially with AI integrations over like Zoom and stuff. So to the point in the question of like, what are some ways to disseminate that, you can have transcripts. Someone should always be taking notes if you're in a meeting, even if it's like a casual brainstorm. I think that it's great to have usually the facilitator or the organizer of the meeting take notes, and then put those in a public place, like in a GitHub wiki or Confluence, and then people can reference them as they would like.
All right, anyone else have any thoughts they want to share before we go to the next question?
I don't have any like answer to the question because it's pretty broad, but I guess the only thing I have to add is that depending on the culture, different cultures can be like very egalitarian or very hierarchical. So people in different cultures might always defer to their superior before speaking, versus other countries like, for instance, the US, where you want everything to be like very flat and equal. So regarding like big meetings and disseminating information, really understanding like the background that your reports come from and your team members come from is very important.
Definitely a great point there, which I think ties back to the beginning, Ben explaining like you can't over communicate something or make too many assumptions if there's like a certain style or a culture that you want to enforce or encourage. Okay, so we have another question in the chat, which is interesting because we had that question earlier about tools that people like to use. And one of the tools that kept coming up was Gather or GatherTown, which is used as a social tool. We've used it for a holiday party, a remote holiday party at G2I. But yeah, so I know that not everybody tries to like do things like that, but in a remote work setup, do you believe that fostering social connections is important even when work is going well? If so, what strategies have worked for you in cultivating a sense of camaraderie and social interaction?
Let me kind of follow up on the issue of cultural differences. So different cultures build trust in different ways. So countries like Japan, trust is built through social relationships, also like South Korea, where the relationship in the workplace is built through like if you go out for dinner or drinks after work, whereas countries like the US are much more based on delivering results with your coworkers. So it really depends, and especially if you have a distributed team with like contractors from Eastern Europe or something or India, but your full-time employees are in a different country. So navigating these sorts of differences is very challenging at times. I don't have an answer. It's just my observation.
But on that subject, I was at a previous employer. They actually gave us, I was part of a leadership group, it wasn't for everyone at that time, but I think they might have rolled it out further. They gave us actual culture training, and they based it on a book called The Culture Map. I don't know if that's the best or worst book, whatever, I don't know, but it was really interesting. They really, and it was quite they actually had, it was based on surveys and scientific research where they really rated cultures on a scale, like different countries on a kind of a scale from high distance to low distance. And these kind of, it was more of a, not your typical cliche, but a more kind of nuanced view, I would say, of various aspects of a culture, authoritarian, nick-authoritarian, things like that. And I found that very helpful. And I think that for people that are working in those kind of situations, it's probably a really good idea.
Yeah, we have some like standardized like ceremonies, I guess, things that we do at Planet Argon to help sort of continue to build up the culture on our team. We use Donut, the Donut bot on Slack integration. And so every 2 weeks, you'll get paired up with like one or maybe two other teammates for like a 15 or 20-minute chat over Zoom. And you are not allowed to talk about work. It's just whatever conversations. Those can be, you can sort of dread them as you see them on your calendar because it's like, oh, this is going to break up my workflow day. But I've always enjoyed them. They're always fun at the end, even if I'm like, this donut. We also have like, meetings, culture meetings that are really team driven. So we have, again, we have a smaller team. So we try every quarter to get input from different members of the team to like see what type of non-work type of activity or meeting they would be interested in doing. And we've had those be very structured. Like we had drag queen bingo one day. We've had like official, like organized, like comedy and magic. Like we had a magician come in and do a Zoom magic show, which was very bizarre and also amazing. But then we also have very like just really no planning type of meetings as well. As like everyone wants to talk about this TV show that we're all watching. So we like put it on the calendar and just have a conversation around that. Or, like we try and have, even in like larger all hands company meetings, we try to break out like shorter sub meetings or subgroups that are not necessarily work related, just to try to give people an opportunity to connect like human to human.
So we're talking about like different cultures, but also in previous questions about tooling. I guess in my experience so far, like leading distributed teams, the best tooling I've used isn't really like technology. It's been through like methodologies. So reading books like Thanks for the Feedback, Crucial Conversations, and Radical Candor, and really how to deliver like very what's the word? Objective and like non-biased expectations and feedback has been really helpful for managing distributed teams.
If I could say one quick thing too, especially to Daniel's point about like the different ways that different cultures prefer to connect or build trust with one another. I think also setting is really important, and moving to remote teams and remote work has really opened up in a sort of way the types of interactions that people are having, because what did an after work team hangout used to be? Happy hour, right? I'm sober, I don't drink. So that was always a barrier for me, or a temptation. And now that's, like, people can drink at their happy hour Zoom meetings if they want, but like, we're not forcing people to go spend time in a place that maybe they're not comfortable in. It's all taking place in a virtual environment, and that virtual environment can be whatever the team wants it to be. So if we want it to be like a pub environment and everyone's there like having a pint, great. And if it is, we're on the moon and we're playing drag bingo or whatever, great. So I think the limitations of virtual meetings and virtual culture club type of events, actually, like, working within that box can force you to think really outside of that box.
Yeah, I'll quickly just chime in. I think the question was asking if it was important when the work was going well. And for me, it is social connection, because the work going well, that's great for now. But without that social connection, that's where burnout comes from, right? You don't have anything beyond the ones and zeros. It's just grinding it day in and day out. That's where you get burnout. You don't have anybody to talk about these things and to do these things with. So yes, I think it's very important. I think it's necessary. We have done party games, like different games where you draw things, guess things. They're a lot of fun. We've had hosts come and do party things for us. People naturally get together for other kind of events. But as a manager, I think it kind of goes back to the one-on-one. And I try, especially at first, it's not all about work, right? It's learning about the person and what you have going on in your life and what you like and don't like. And then as a manager, introducing that is like, oh, Ivor loves metal bands, right? And music comes up and somebody's talking, it's like, oh, you guys actually have a similar taste in music. I mean, you should talk about that. And just starting that conversation, and now they have something to talk about. And look for ways to kind of plug that in. As like, oh, you should go talk to so and so, because Michelle and I talked quite a bit about Messi coming to America when all that happened. We're both big MLS fans, so you learn what people like to do, and you make those connections. But as a manager, you should look for ways to facilitate those connections, right? Force those introductions, get some people talking, and then just kind of moonwalk out the room and let it happen.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I will talk to anybody about Lionel Messi whenever they want, and I'll force the conversation usually as well. So, you really just have to stop me on that topic. But we are at the end of our time. We only have just 2 more minutes. So I really wanted to go around super quickly and give everybody opportunity to add in one more final thought. If there's something around this topic that you feel really passionate about that we didn't touch on, just a parting thought to leave us with, and we'll just go around in a circle. Daniel, Ben, John, and then Lee.
Any last words? Hard for me to say something really inspiring out of the blue like this. Yeah, just like cultures are very different. Even the way you think about things you take for granted can vary differently between cultures. So always try to practice a healthy skepticism about how you view the way other people operate.
Yeah, I would second that. Don't assume things about people. Be very sincere and anti-cynical in your dealings with people, and also let communication and culture, for the most part, come from the team as much as possible, even if you have to sort of pry it out of people in a one-on-one. Asking them what they're comfortable with, what holidays they want to take, that sort of thing, what slang they don't understand. Just lots of letting the team form itself, I suppose.
I think that one of the challenges of knowledge work management is understanding that, people and work output, it's not a sort of a linear correlation. Put another person on, then another bit of linear bit of work output, but rather knowledge work is really, your productivity is really tied to psychological, emotional, and other aspects. And it's so easy to fall into the trap of we'll just double the team size and then we'll get twice as much work done or whatever. And so I think that's this kind of idea of managing the whole person, or thinking about the whole person and how to create environments which people work best in. That's something which transcends remote or not remote, on-site, whatever. However you're working, these are the things you've got to think about. How can we create environments in which the people are able to do their best work? And the same principle applies to how you think about remote work.
Yeah, that was a great answer. I can't come up with something better than that. I'll just add, don't forget the human that you're working with, right? We do a lot of tasks, a lot of milestones and deployments and all these, like that's what we look at. And the person behind all that gets forgotten. They're not on the metric sheet. So just always be thinking about the person.
Love that. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us. Thanks, everyone in the audience, Twitter, LinkedIn, Crowdcast, for joining us for this event. I think there were some great insights and knowledge shared. This recording is going to be immediately available at this link, the same Crowdcast link that you're joining. You'll be able to watch the recording here. And I saw some promises in the chat that we will send out a reading list, because I think of all of the panel events or community events we've done, this is the one with the most book recommendations by far. And I think everybody wants to get in on this. So we're going to send out a reading list and the recording. So keep a lookout for that. Again, thank you guys so much for this. This has been so fun and a pleasure to have you. And we will keep in touch. See everyone next time.